Mr. President.
The Democratic leader.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm proud to support the resolution by the senator from Illinois, and we'll hear from her shortly, and very much appreciate her work. Now, in his famous letter to Lydia Bixby, mother of 5 sons who all died in the Civil War, President Lincoln prayed that, quote, our Heavenly Father would assuage her grief, noting that solemn pride that must be yours to have laid so costly a sacrifice upon the altar of freedom. According to a recent report in The Atlantic, President Trump complained about visiting a World War I military cemetery in France because Americans who died there were, quote, suckers and losers. Over the past 4 years, President Trump has achieved some remarkable lows in the annals of presidential conduct and character. But every so often, you are jolted by the sheer depravity of his comments. This president's insults about our fallen service members and the nature of military service in general fall into that category, the lowest of the low. There is no greater sacrifice an American can make than to lay down their life for our country. No greater sorrow than the sorrow felt by parents who bury their children wrapped in the American flag. Everyone who has the privilege of working in public office knows this deep truth in their bones, but not the current President of the United States, not President Trump. Not this man who dodged the Vietnam War with bone spurs. Not this man who insulted Gold Star families, who looked at our former colleague, John McCain, a man who was tortured in a POW camp for 5 years and said, I prefer people who weren't captured. Not this president who doesn't understand one iota of the word sacrifice and cannot even comprehend why someone might give themselves for a larger cause. According to these reports, when President Trump went to Arlington National Cemetery, which included a visit to the grave of General Kelly's son, he turned to him and said, I don't get it. What was in it for them? Everyone ought to be appalled. What the Commander-in-Chief says about our service members and our veterans matters a great deal. It affects the morale of our military, our standing on the world stage, and it reveals the character of the man who has to make life and death decisions involving our armed forces. We've heard the president and his team try to deny that the president ever made those comments. I mean, come on. The president is on video saying nearly the same thing out loud on several occasions about one of our former colleagues, no less. In a short time, Senator Duckworth will ask this chamber to condemn the president's remarks and reaffirm our nation's steadfast and unwavering commitment to the individuals serving in the U.S. Armed Services. I want to thank the senator from Illinois for leading this resolution. And more importantly, I want to thank her for her service, both to the people of Illinois and to our country as an Army aviation officer. I hope, I pray, I plead with our Republican friends not to block this resolution. I'm already disappointed at how few of them have spoken out to criticize President Trump for his remarks. Are they really so afraid to say anything against this president that they would give him a pass when he disparages our own military? Will they really block a resolution condemning these unequivocally disgusting comments? A resolution that reaffirms our support for the military? I certainly hope not. If you can't stand up and say President was wrong to say these things, then what can you criticize this president or any president for? When comments like this are made about sacrifices of our armed forces, every single elected official should understand instinctively that they are wrong, especially when they come from the Commander-in-Chief. Let's have the entire Senate, Democrats and Republicans, stand together and say so with this resolution. I yield to my colleague from Illinois.
Thank you. Mr. President,
Senator from Illinois. I've come to the floor today as a senator, a veteran, and apparently, according to Donald Trump, a sucker and a loser. Perhaps my presence here is uncomfortable for him. After all, according to a number of reports, he thinks nobody wants to see wounded warriors like me who've lost limbs fighting to keep other Americans safe. But unfortunately for him, I am here. And I'm here because of the ethos of the United States military is the exact opposite of the selfish, craven, me-first mentality that Trump has shown every hour of every day of his life. In the Army, part of our soldiers' creed was to never leave a fallen comrade behind. And the only reason I'm speaking today, the only reason I'm breathing today, alive today, is because on November 12, 2004, after Iraqi insurgents fired an RPG through the Black Hawk I was co-piloting, my buddies embodied that creed. They thought I was dead, and yet they risked their own safety to bring my body back home to my family, only realizing I was still breathing when they got me to the rescue aircraft. And then these heroes, wounded themselves, refused care until the medic had tended to me first. If it had been Donald Trump in that dusty field with me, or in any other battlefield, our wounded like me never would have made it home at all. But he never would have been in Iraq that day because Trump fundamentally cannot understand the notion of sacrificing for your nation. He can't comprehend the true meaning of courage, the idea of fighting for something greater than yourself, greater than your bank account or your poll numbers. He doesn't understand service, so he doesn't understand America's service members, the heroes, most of them anonymous to all but those who love them, who've allowed him to sleep soundly in his gold-plated Fifth Avenue tower throughout his privileged, gilded life. Instead, Trump has reportedly called those who've died or been wounded in battle, and I quote, suckers and losers. Well, just today, it was reported that he used the most demeaning of terms to refer to the military leaders he thinks of as his generals, echoing comments he's made publicly time after time when he slandered war heroes like John McCain and Gold Star families like the Khans, acting yet again as if bleeding to defend your nation is something to be ashamed of rather than a badge of honor, too ignorant to understand that he's the one who should be ashamed. You know, I spent this weekend reflecting on the words of another Republican president who in the midst of crisis reminded those sitting before him at Gettysburg the duty our nation has to those killed serving our country. In that address that we all know so well, he declared that it is for us, the living, to dedicate ourselves to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced, that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That cause was a new birth of freedom in this nation, the bettering of our democracy, bringing our union closer to perfection even though we know we can never achieve it. What Lincoln understood, and what Trump never will, is that to be contemptuous of American warriors is to be disrespectful to the whole of the American people. And when those lucky enough to serve in Congress or in the White House raise our right hands and swear out to faithfully serve this nation in these ornate, hallowed halls, it is on us to keep faith with those who've raised their right hands and sworn to serve this nation in the most dangerous war zones imaginable. There's an implicit contract between our country's leaders and our warriors. They and their families have entrusted us with their care, their training, and the decision to send them to war, and that responsibility is a grave one. They will march to do our bidding on command. They will cross the line of departure and begin killing the enemy at our behest, with no regard for their personal safety or the toll on their mental health. If our leaders regard our heroes as suckers and losers, what damage will be done to America's sons and daughters who comprise the terrible, swift sword? Well, I can tell you right now, it endangers every single one of them, and it endangers our nation's safety. If you care about nothing else, if you care nothing about basic decency or troop morale, it is bad for troop readiness as well. Because when a warrior goes into combat, They need to know that their buddies to their left and their right will follow that creed to never leave a fallen comrade behind. That no matter what, no matter how, their buddies, their nation, will get them out of there, even if it's just bringing their body home to rest at Arlington. It's because our service members uphold the values of the military. In the Army, those are loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, integrity, and personal courage, that they are willing to sacrifice everything for this country, and that we have the greatest fighting force on the face of the earth. Donald Trump, by contrast, has shown active disdain for each of those values in his 4 years in office. He's shown the exact opposite of every one of those traits, displaying no sense of duty, a laughable sense of loyalty, integrity and courage, no, not to be seen. He has no respect for those in uniform, and selfishness is his trademark rather than the selflessness of our troops. But if Trump's toxicity starts to break down those values within the military, if we start to question why we care about those who have been wounded or killed for us, if we start leaving folks behind, then people will begin to think twice about signing up to serve. Families will reconsider supporting their loved ones' decisions to enlist. Those few Americans who are ready to take on that mission, that burden, will start to hesitate because they won't know if their own crew will risk their lives like mine did to carry their limp body back to safety. But this coward-in-chief in the White House today is too ignorant in matters of both common decency and national security to get that. And so he doesn't deserve to be commander-in-chief of this military for another 4 minutes, let alone another 4 years. So yes, I'm disappointed that my Republican colleagues will be objecting to passing my Senate resolution honoring our troops, veterans, and Gold Star families, and that they will not be condemning Trump's disgraceful behavior that denigrates military service, that has dishonored the office of the presidency. Does any senator actually oppose affirming that part of what makes America not only great but good is the service of Americans who have always placed the mission first, never asking what's in it for them? Does any member actually object to the Senate resolving to always respect the sacrifices and bravery of those who became prisoners of war or went missing in action? I'm confident that no one here actually opposes the Senate declaring that we'll always care for service-disabled veterans who've borne the battle in defense of our nation, recognizing that wounds of war are earned by patriots who put America's interests before their own. So what's the problem? If Senate Republicans actually agree with everything I just listed, why would they oppose my resolution stating the same? I know some may dismiss this resolution out of hand, claiming it's nothing more than just a partisan jab at Donald Trump. To those people, I'd simply ask that they not rewrite recent history and stop pretending that outrage over Trump's disrespect of the military is something new, or that one that just originated with the Democratic Party. After all, some of the very first public officials to speak out against it were Republican senators who continue to serve in this very chamber today. When then-candidate Trump claimed the late Senator John McCain was not a war hero because Trump likes people who weren't captured, it was the senator's friend from South Carolina who wrote, "If there was ever any doubt that Trump should not be our commander-in-chief, this should end our doubt." And again, it was the senior senator from Florida who said much of the same. I can only say that it is shameful that no one on the other side of the aisle has stood up to condemn this president for the comments he has made, for the fact that he did not make his way to that cemetery to honor those veterans of Belleau Woods laying at rest in that foreign soil, who were there not just for us, but for our allies, for everyone that they may never even know. So today I'm here, Mr. President, to ask, as if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent that the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of Senate Resolution 689, which was submitted earlier today. I further ask that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be considered made and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Objection.
Reserving the right to object, Mr. President.
The senator from Georgia.
Thank you, Senator Duckworth, for your service and your sacrifice. We share the goal of supporting our military and our veterans. However, the left's latest outrage against President Trump is, as usual, baseless. Here's the truth. The Atlantic article is just one in a long line of lies and political attacks against President Trump by unaccountable fake news outlets and the so-called anonymous sources. Here's another truth, one that won't be covered by the fake news. No one has done more to support our men and women in uniform, including our veterans, and more to restore peace and prosperity for all Americans than President Donald J. Trump. Let me share the facts with some of my colleagues and the media, which they refuse to acknowledge. This president has championed a historic investment of $2.2 trillion into our military, a 3% pay raise for troops, the largest in a decade. He's personally thanked our troops on the ground in Iraq, Afghanistan, South Korea, and Germany. He spent countless hours honoring our wounded warriors at Walter Reed Medical Center and honoring our fallen service members killed in action at Dover Air Force Base. He confirmed plans to withdraw troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, honoring his commitment to end endless wars. And finally, today, he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize for his leadership in facilitating the Israel-UAE peace deal, a historic step toward a safer world for all. I'm proud to defend President Trump against another desperate political attack, and I proudly stand with him in support of our military and our veterans. This Atlantic hit piece is the antithesis of honest journalism. More than 24 former and current administration officials have rebutted these false claims on the record. In fact, the liberal activist author, who has a history of using sources that are shaky at best, he admitted that his reliance on anonymous sources was not good enough. Well, what's not good enough is the media's treatment of this president and his clear track record of support of our military and their families. Last week, I was at Fort Gordon and Fort Stewart in Georgia, visiting our active duty members. I saw firsthand the opportunities our military leaders now have to grow our safety and security on all fronts, from combating terrorism to making sure our cyber domain is safer. There was a renewed sense of optimism that should bring all Americans comfort. And this is a direct result of the president, of the work that he's doing every single day for our men and women in uniform. They're fighting every single day to protect us, and he is fighting every single day to have their back. Here's the truth. President Trump has delivered on his promises to rebuild our military, to respect our veterans, and to keep our country safe. And it is time to stop playing politics with our national security and those who provide it. For these reasons, Mr. President, I object.
Heard.
Yeah, Mr. President, I think I'm going to go. No, it's going to be me. Sorry.
Senator from Illinois does have the floor.
Thank you. All I can do, Mr. President, is to implore my colleagues on the other side of the aisle to reassert their independence, actually put principle before party, and support this resolution, which simply recognizes a basic reality. Trump's denigration of military service is even more disgraceful today than it was 5 years ago, as he is now at least supposed to be our troops commander-in-chief. You know, former Chief of Staff of the Army, General Weyand, once wrote that the American Army really is the people's army, in the sense that it belongs to the American people. When the Army is committed, the American people are committed. The Army is not so much an arm of the executive branch as it is an arm of the American people. He may have been talking about the Army, but the sentiment holds true for every military branch, every one of which belongs to the American people. It is made up of their sons and daughters, mothers and fathers, sisters and brothers, all of whom have dedicated their lives to serving the nation they love on behalf of the people they love. When Donald Trump mocks our troops, he's mocking every American in every part of this country. When he derides wounded warriors, he's just providing further proof that to him, the word sacrifice is so foreign, it might as well be in another language. When he makes fun of those who've fallen in battle, he reveals not only his ignorance of national security, but his own personal cowardice and insecurities as well. To him, service will never mean anything other than someone else serving him. So Trump may not want to see me here today. He may not like to see visible proof of my war wounds, but he will keep seeing me here because it is my duty to honor the heroes who saved me by using my second chance, using every extra minute, every extra moment that I have to look out for our troops and veterans from here in the Capitol. I will take advantage of every extra breath I get to breathe because unlike Donald Trump, our men and women in uniform know what courage, sacrifice, and service truly mean. With that, I note how grateful I am for my Democratic colleagues who are here with me today to show support for our troops, veterans, and Gold Star families.
Mr. President.
Senator from Georgia.
Instead of passing a resolution meant to politicize our military, I'm offering my own resolution to honor the service and the sacrifice of the members of the United States Armed Forces, veterans, prisoners of war, and Gold Star families. My resolution also recognizes President Trump's strong record of supporting our troops, taking care of our veterans, and defending the American people from foreign threats. President Trump and I have and always will honor the service and sacrifice of our brave men and women in uniform. As if in legislative session, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of my resolution at the desk. I further ask that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, and that the motions to reconsider be considered, made, and laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
I object.
The objection is heard.
I cannot support the incomplete Senate Republican resolution for a simple reason. We are not honoring the service and sacrifice of members of the United States Armed Forces, veterans, and Gold Star families in the Republican resolution. We cannot do that. If we stay silent and meek when confronted when President Trump's disgraceful denigration of military service, prisoners of war, and military families continue. Look, we can't control the offensive comments and actions of the president, but the Senate can make a clear statement that our chamber rejects such disgraceful sentiments. Republicans' refusal to criticize President Trump speaks volumes when you remember the outrage over Donald Trump's disrespect of our military is not a new concern. It actually originates with Republican senators who were among the very first public officials to speak out against his denigration of military service and prisoners of war. The senior senator from Florida, I remind you, also spared no outrage when, in responding to candidate Trump's claim that Senator McCain was not a war hero, stated, and I quote, "It is not just absurd, it is offensive, it's ridiculous, and I do think it's a disqualifier as commander-in-chief." The Republican resolution is incomplete if it does not condemn this president's comments denigrating our troops. And that is why I am disappointed Republicans won't join me in passing my resolution that recognizes the sad truth. Donald Trump never changed, and his denigration of military service and sacrifice is as disqualifying today as it was years ago. I see my senior senator from Illinois.
Democratic whip.
Mr. President, let me say at the outset how proud I am to serve with my colleague, Senator Tammy Duckworth of Illinois. Her sacrifice for America is nothing short of amazing. Her life story, her commitment to the men and women in uniform that she served with, to the veterans and others, is now well established not just in my state but across this nation. Only a small minority of Americans have had the privilege and honor of serving in the military. Many, like myself, count themselves as those who respect the military and understand that they deserve that respect for their willingness to volunteer to serve and even to die for this nation. What Senator Duckworth has done with her life is a clear indication of the spirit of the fighting women and men who keep this nation democratic and safe. I'm really disappointed. What a great moment it would have been in the history of the Senate if we had Republican support as well as Democratic support for the Duckworth resolution. I'm sorry the senator from Georgia objected. She took exception to the Atlantic magazine article, the one that said where the president called those who died in war losers and suckers. But even that article has been accepted by Fox News as being a valid comment made by the president and reported. But if we were to take the Atlantic magazine and set it aside, there's ample evidence of this president's attitude toward our military. We all heard Donald Trump say publicly when he was running for president in 2015 about our friend and colleague, the late John McCain. He's not a war hero. I like people who weren't captured. 5 years in a prisoner of war camp in Vietnam, and this president, Donald Trump, dismisses him as no war hero. John McCain suffered for this nation. He deserves the respect of everyone, let alone the president. We also saw Donald Trump publicly attack a Gold Star family in 2016, the parents of the late Humayun Khan, an Army captain killed in Iraq in 2004. We heard President Trump dismiss traumatic brain injury faced by service members and veterans as just headaches. We've seen his silence in the face of reports that Russia offered bounties to kill American service members in Afghanistan. We've witnessed his use of military officials for photo ops or for his own personal security purposes. And recall the scene in A Very Stable Genius by Washington Post reporters Philip Rucker and Carol Leonnig, in which Trump called the service chiefs, quote, a bunch of dopes and babies, and barked, "You're all losers. You don't know how to win anymore." President Trump repeated those claims again at a news conference just this week. These are just a few examples of not fake news, but real news about this president's attitude toward the American fighting men and women. It's no surprise that he would say vile things privately if he would say these things publicly. Instead of respecting our troops, President Trump ridicules them. Instead of bowing his head in humility, he barks insults and obscenities. No president in our history, none that I can even imagine, have been so juvenile, so abusive, and so cynical in speaking of our fallen heroes. And what do we hear from Republican veterans and office holders about these sickening comments? Very little, if anything, in objection. Their silence is deafening. Mr. President, I just want to close by thanking my colleague, Senator Duckworth, for bringing this matter to the floor of the United States Senate. Every member of the Senate, men, women, Democrat, Republican, we all carry the flag, proudly march in parades, and give those inspirational speeches on Memorial Day about the men and women who have served our nation. But where are the voices in the United States Senate today to speak out against the outrages of this president? I yield the floor.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Mr. President, I'm honored to join Senator Duckworth in supporting this proposal, and it gives me great pride to serve in the United States Senate with her. She is the living embodiment of the kind of sacrifice that our president does not understand. There are two things here, though, that are very wrong. One is a president who thinks that the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines who have laid down their lives for this country are suckers and losers, and that it's okay to say that about them. It is beyond disrespectful, it is beneath contempt, and it is totally in character for this man. Those soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines can't answer. They can't speak for themselves any longer. So when something like that is said, it is very important that in the highest offices of the country, people stand up and push back. In graves in France and Belgium and Manila and around the world lie the mortal remains of men, boys, women who gave their lives and who cannot speak for themselves. And it is heartbreaking for me to see that we cannot come together and agree on this in this body. I can promise you that if President Obama or President Clinton had said anything like this, the other side of this chamber would be in pandemonium. It would be a scene of hysteria. Senators would be lining up through the doors to come and condemn this foul and hateful speech. We'd be hearing a lot about the last measure of devotion. And instead, we are seeing the last measure of devolution of a great party into what now resembles as much of anything a cult. I'll be interested to see what my colleagues have in mind as they go through next year's Veterans Day and Memorial Day, having been unable to say one word against this calumny of our troops today. It is, frankly, heartbreaking. I traveled a lot with John McCain, and one of our trips took us through the Philippines, and I got up very early in the morning to go and have basically a dawn visit to the American Cemetery in Manila. And the particular reason I went there is to see a name on the wall of the memorial, George Bruin Whitehouse. George was 21 when he was killed. He was flying fighter planes as a Navy pilot off an aircraft carrier called the USS Cowpens. His body was never recovered. His plane was shot down and crashed into the wilderness, and that was the end of it. But his name is still there, carved high up in the marble as a last memorial of his sacrifice. A president who doesn't get that is a disgrace. I yield the floor. Oh, and particularly I yield the floor to a colleague who is an American combat veteran from the Vietnam War, to which my father dedicated 5 years of his life. So it is a remarkable honor for me to be able to speak in between Senator Duckworth and Senator Carper, and I am very cognizant of that honor. I yield.
And it is an honor to follow my friend Sheldon. And you could only turn out well, my friend, with the kind of bloodlines that you have. Mr. President, I rise today really for one reason. I rise today to make crystal clear that we are profoundly grateful to every American who has answered our nation's call to serve in uniform, to risk their lives, and in too many instances to lay down their lives so that we might remain a free people. We are profoundly grateful to their families who have sacrificed so much while their loved ones were away, fighting to protect the rest of us and making this a better and more just world. And we're especially indebted to those families whose loved ones left for war and never came home. It is a sacrifice that many Americans can barely imagine, but one that has been all too real for millions of families since the founding of our nation. Mr. President, one of those families was my mother's family. I never got to meet my mom's younger brother. His name was Bob Kid Patton. My mom was a Patton. And Bobby, as he was known, was the youngest of 5 children, born near coal mining town Beckley, West Virginia, to my grandparents, Ray and Effie Mae Patton, a Gold Star mother. Bobby was killed in action on October 26, 1944, during a kamikaze attack in the Western Pacific on his aircraft carrier, the USS Sewanee. Among the bodies of the ship's crew who were never recovered was that of our Uncle Bob. On the day of that attack, he was, get this, 19 years, 6 months, 23 days old. My grandparents were never able to see their son again or say goodbye. My sister and I, along with our cousins, would never meet him. Neither Bob Patton nor his Sewanee shipmates, who also perished that day, were suckers or losers. as President Trump has characterized others who answered our nation's call to uniform. They were and remain heroes. I was fortunate enough to make it home after serving 3 tours in Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War, but 58,000 of my brothers and sisters never did. Their names are inscribed in a black granite wall not far from here so that Americans will remember their sacrifice. And let me add, those 58,000 Americans were not suckers or losers either. As President Trump has described John McCain, they were patriots. Unlike Donald Trump, they answered the call of duty. My squadron and I were deployed to Southeast Asia as part of the 7th Fleet for several of the years that John McCain was held as a prisoner of war in the Hanoi Hilton, along with hundreds of other POWs. His plane had been shot down in 1967 over Hanoi. Both his arms and one of his legs were broken during the ensuing crash. He was taken a prisoner of war. For 5.5 years, John McCain was held captive, beaten, tortured. And despite this, he refused the early release that was offered to him by his captors. Far from being the loser that President Trump refers to him, John McCain was the embodiment of courage. And my colleagues know it. He proved it again and again and again, in uniform and right here in this chamber, standing right over there. Mr. President, a number of us in this body have been blessed to serve alongside other true patriots, both during our time in Congress and in uniform. The late Dan Inouye lost an arm and he earned the Medal of Honor while serving in the legendary 442nd, the most decorated Army unit of World War II. They were all Japanese Americans. They were despised by many Americans. They were heroes too. And then there's former Senator Bob Dole, another highly decorated World War II hero who nearly paralyzed, lost the use of one arm after being hit by enemy fire while helping to save the life of a fellow soldier. And then there's, of course, our amazing friend, our amazing colleague, Tammy Duckworth. God loves her. Tammy, thank you for bringing us to the floor today. But for any American to disparage heroes like them who gave their life and limb of our country would be despicable. But to hear that contempt from a man, now our commander-in-chief, who chose not to serve in the Vietnam War, allegedly because of bone spurs in his foot, is worse than despicable. It is abhorrent. What is most surprising and really disappointing to me, though, is not that Donald Trump would use words like loser and sucker to describe heroes like John McCain and others. What is most surprising and disappointing is that there are only Democrats on this floor today condemning the utter contempt that Donald Trump has shown for our service members over too many years. There should be 100 senators on this floor today, 100, saying in no uncertain terms that we have nothing but respect and admiration for those who have served, and we will not allow them to be mocked or ridiculed by anyone, including the President of the United States. Honoring those who have served this country and risked their lives for this country is among the most sacred obligations any of us have. If we can't stand up and defend those men and women, then we have no business being here. Let me close with this. To the millions of soldiers, sailors, airmen, and women, Marines, and Coast Guard members who are risking their lives right now around the world and who have done so for generations, listen to this. We salute you. We thank you. We thank your families from the bottom of our hearts. God bless you. Stay home. Stay safe. Come home. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Nevada.
Mr. President, listening to my colleagues, I'm honored every day to be able to serve with them in the United States Senate. In 2018, in Minden, Nevada, I had the honor of commemorating the opening of the moving wall. This is a replica of the Vietnam War Memorial that travels the country so the public can pay their respects to Vietnam veterans. I will tell you, I will always remember the stories that veterans and their families shared with me that day. Stories of coming home from a divisive war to an equally divided public. The pain of that reception was still fresh for many of them decades later. America's service members make an implicit pact with our country. They agree to put their lives on the line, and in exchange, they deserve our support, our care for them and their families, and our respect. Last week, The Atlantic magazine published a story in which anonymous sources claim that Donald Trump doesn't demonstrate that respect. The article described a commander-in-chief who calls his own country's fallen soldiers losers and suckers. The story fits a pattern from other anonymous sources over the years, some of whom describe the president lashing out at generals and calling them dopes and babies. Now, granted, these are from anonymous sources, so let's set them aside for just a moment. As the saying goes, journalism is the rough draft of history, and sometimes that rough draft gets things wrong. But what do we know? What we do know from the president's public statements is that Donald Trump does not understand the sacrifice and heroism that Americans' armed forces demonstrate on a daily basis, and that makes him unfit to lead them. How can a commander-in-chief make life and death decisions for our troops when he doesn't understand the very nature of the sacrifice he is asking? I'm not making up Donald Trump's refusal to understand military sacrifice. You just have to look at the record, and you've heard some of it today. But that record is part of a public record that in 1968 showed Donald Trump avoided military service through a medical deferment. Yet although Donald Trump did not serve in the military, he's felt free to criticize others who have and their families. In 2015, we heard then-candidate Donald Trump said that John McCain, and I quote, was not a war hero. I like people who weren't captured, he said. He's talking about a man who endured torture during the 5 years he spent as a prisoner, a man who upheld the highest standards of our military by turning down the release that his captors offered him in order to stay with his fellow POWs. A man who refused to denounce his country even when his captors informed him it could earn him his freedom. This president clearly has no conception of that integrity and that sacrifice. A president who refuses to honor men and women who were captured doesn't understand what heroism is. And in 2016, as the Republican nominee for president, Donald Trump attacked the family of Captain Humayun Khan, who was killed in Iraq trying to stop a suicide bomber. For his brave and self-sacrificing actions that day, Captain Khan received a Bronze Star and a Purple Heart. Now, accompanied by his wife, Mr. Khan spoke about his son's sacrifice at the Democratic National Convention, and in response, after seeing Mr. Khan and his wife, Donald Trump said, well, look, if you look at his wife, she was standing there. She had nothing to say. She probably maybe she wasn't allowed to have anything to say at all. Can you imagine criticizing a mother for not being able to articulate the pain of losing her son? A president who mocks a military family's pain doesn't understand what selflessness is. And just this Monday, as we've heard, Donald Trump said, and again, I quote, that the top people in the Pentagon want to do nothing but fight wars so that all of those wonderful companies that make the bombs stay happy. Well, a president who attacks America's generals as valuing profits over the men and women they command don't understand and doesn't understand what leadership is. And because even after 3 years as commander-in-chief, Donald Trump can't understand or appreciate the commitment and sacrifice of America's service members, he cannot effectively lead them. At the end of the day, Donald Trump does not understand the very purpose of our military. He seems to believe that the military is his personal police force. He doesn't get that the allegiance our armed forces swear is to the American nation, its people, and its Constitution. We saw this when in June, President Trump threatened to use the Insurrection Act to send active duty troops to police the streets of this country. And I was in Washington the day that this administration ordered police on horseback, armed with tear gas and concussion grenades, to disperse protesters who were peacefully demonstrating against police violence. And also that Donald Trump could stage a photo opportunity in front of a church holding a Bible. And that same night, I could hear the noise overhead from the National Guard Black Hawk helicopters that engaged in a show of force display on the streets of Washington. Now, Mr. President, I come from a family of service members. My father was stationed in Korea after the war. My grandfathers both served in the U.S. Army. And I had a great uncle who was on the beach at Normandy. My father-in-law piloted LCM-3s in Korea for the Army. And I keep on the shelf in my Senate office a photo that he took of the Korean War Memorial here in Washington in winter. That stark image of troops in the snow moving cautiously through danger is a reminder to me of the humanity and sacrifice of our service members, including my father and father-in-law. And each year, when I celebrate the induction of new Nevadans to the service academies, I see the next generation devoting their idealism and their courage to our country. And I consider the weighty sacrifice by people who are so very young. You know, after reading the stories in the news and reflecting on the history of comments from our current commander-in-chief, I just want to say one simple thing to veterans, service members, and their families in Nevada and throughout this country. Thank you. I will always stand with American troops who put their lives and bodies on the line to protect our country. And the American people, well, they deserve a commander-in-chief who will do the same. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm proud to follow my colleagues who have spoken so eloquently, particularly Senators Carper and Duckworth, and to join them today because they are in the great tradition of this body. Bob Dole, Daniel Inouye, Tammy Duckworth, Tom Carper, John McCain. We've known our share of heroes. And I'm here to say thank you to them and to the others among us who have served. I'm proud to be here as a dad of two veterans, one a combat infantry officer in the Marine Corps, another a special operator in the Navy, both deployed, and to have served myself in the United States Marine Corps Reserve. And I'm here to say to the other moms and dads and loved ones, Donald Trump does not speak for me. Donald Trump does not speak for us. Donald Trump does not speak for America. When he called those brave heroes who laid down their lives suckers or losers, my first reaction was disbelief. And then, in an instant, it was totally to believe that he said it, because it was so much in character for Donald Trump. For him, it is all about Donald Trump. If somebody else can serve and take his place without sacrifice on his part, so much the better. But Donald Trump does not speak for the America that I know and love and who have given of themselves or risked their lives, as my colleagues who have spoken today so clearly have done. When Donald Trump talked about the heroes of Belleau Woods, he might have used a history lesson, because clearly the Marines at Belleau Wood were not suckers. In fact, the relentless tenacity of their fighting earned them a nickname from the German soldiers who were their adversaries. The Germans called them Teufelhunden, meaning devil dog. That name, a proud moniker, has stuck with them all of these years, and they use it in addressing each other. Devil dog, that's what they were. One of their commanding officers, Major Thomas Holcomb, wrote a letter to his wife 2 days into the battle saying, quote, "The regiment has carried itself with undying glory, but the price was heavy. There never was such self-sacrifice, courage, and spirit shown," end quote. In the 3 weeks of fighting, the 4th Marine Brigade suffered a 55% casualty rate. 55%. And his battalion alone suffered 764 casualties out of 900 Marines. He became the 17th Commandant of the Marine Corps, and Belleau Wood became part of Marine Corps history. That battle was one of hundreds, thousands of battles where soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines have distinguished themselves with uncommon valor. And for every Belleau Wood, there are others for each of those services. None of them fought by suckers or losers. The cost of war is unspeakably high, and we know that from our own work on the Armed Services Committee, on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I have just come from a hearing of the Veterans Affairs Committee where we were discussing the problem of veteran suicide. 20 every day of our heroes take their own lives. And yet we here in this body have failed to provide effective solutions to those invisible wounds that cause those deaths. That is a national disgrace. So to the loved ones of all who have risked and given their lives, let me just say, we are here to make a point. And this resolution makes that point eloquently and powerfully. Donald Trump speaks for no one in this body, so far as I know. And the shame is that our Republican colleagues are literally absent. They are absent without leave. They are AWOL from this moment in history that calls upon them to stand up and be heard in the name of our nation's heroes. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
From Virginia.
Mr. President, in 2015, when I heard then candidate Donald Trump denigrate the service of my friend, the late Senator John McCain, suggesting that he was a loser and that his status as a POW was somehow cause for shame or embarrassment, I was rock solid certain that the America I knew and loved would never allow such a man to occupy the office of president. I was wrong. The McCain attack began a slow reveal of the unsurprising moral bankruptcy of a man and the surprising willingness of Republican leadership to tolerate that moral void. The reveal reached a new level last week with Jeffrey Goldberg's reporting, significantly verified by other reporters, that President Trump, as commander-in-chief, still denigrates the service of military members, calling them suckers and losers. The Trump campaign protested loudly against the charge, but in the same instant put out a social media message ridiculing Joe Biden as he visited the grave of his son Beau, an Iraq War veteran, after church last Sunday. As a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee and the father of a United States Marine, I find President Trump's attack on our military infuriating. In an era when his countrymen were risking their lives in Southeast Asia, the president dodged service with a timely and miraculously short-lived diagnosis of bone spurs. He bragged that his own personal Vietnam was trying to avoid sexually transmitted diseases at home, while others were trying to avoid bullets, landmines, and torture in Vietnam. The selfish young man who avoided service and then equated the ultimate sacrifices of others with his sex life has now ascended into the world's most powerful office, holding on to those same immature views. And it's not just about the president's words and attitude. Solid intelligence suggests that Russia has paid bounties for the killing of U.S. troops in Afghanistan. The president and his team have spent time trying to deny the news to the American public, with ridiculous efforts to pretend that the president was never even briefed about the matter. The president still refuses to acknowledge the gravity of the threat or hold Russia to account, but of course he has described Vladimir Putin as a better leader than Obama, and as a friend. He must think, why risk that friendship for suckers? After watching this president for years, I conclude that the attack on the military is part of a broader hostility to the notion of serving others. The president stiffs charities, disrespects federal employees, denigrates teachers, and undercuts programs like public service loan forgiveness. He treats the office as a personal piggy bank, filling staff positions with family members and cronies, steering business toward his resorts, making his main domestic priority a tax bill that dramatically benefited his own pocketbook. The death, economic depression, deficits, and social division that he has caused through his chaos hardly trouble his conscience, because he has the satisfaction of knowing that he's used the office to enrich himself. Is this the exemplar that we want for our country? President Trump may be unique among American presidents in that no one holds him up as an example for America's children. No parent or teacher or minister or youth mentor that I know tells children to act like him or talk like him or treat people like he does. Even his supporters, professing support for his judicial nominees or tax plan, have an instinctive understanding that he is not an example we would want our young people to emulate. Of all the critical issues on the ballot for America in November, the most important is the most elemental. Is America a place where the commitment to serving others matters? Are we our brother's keeper? Do we want our young to join the military or enter the Peace Corps or teach in our public schools? Is service just for suckers, or is it the essence of American patriotism? Growing up, I was certain that I knew the answer to that question. I am less certain today, but I am infinitely more determined. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Gentlemen, yield for a moment.
I yield.
Okay. I spoke earlier of my Uncle Bob. I'd forgotten that we had his photo back here. But this is what they look like at the age of 19 years and 6 months. And this picture was framed and could be seen in the dining room of my grandparents' house until they died. Alongside it was my picture.
Can I ask the Senator from Delaware a question? Did that young man lose his life in the field of battle?
He was one of a number of sailors on the USS Swanee who were killed in a kamikaze attack, and a number of their bodies were never recovered.
I want to thank the Senator from Delaware. You know, this isn't the first time. This isn't the first time the President has denigrated our military. Not the first time, it won't be the last time. Because there's a total lack of appreciation by this President for the people who serve our country and our military. Don't have to talk about the bone spurs that gave him how many deferments? 5 deferments? He found a way of not fighting in Vietnam. Thank God his daddy had enough money to allow him to do that. And then we think back to John McCain, decorated war hero. Oh, no, not in President Trump's mind. No, it didn't matter that he was a prisoner of war. He was no war hero. The deferment president said. Well, I'm going to tell you, everybody in this body knew John McCain. Everybody in this body probably had a scrap with John McCain. And everybody in this body had the highest amount of respect for John McCain. He truly was a war hero. And then there's the veterans that served in Vietnam that Agent Orange got the best of them. They're now in their 70s and they're dying because of their exposure of Agent Orange. Let me tell you, the President denied them their benefits. Denied them their benefits. If it wasn't for this body and the House, they still wouldn't have those benefits. And then there's the time that Vladimir Putin put a contract out on our military folks. Did the President speak up? No, not to his good buddy Vladimir. Nope, wouldn't do it. And then there was the privatization of the VA from his buddies down in Mar-a-Lago. Cost Secretary Shulkin his job because he said no. And in a bipartisan way, we said no. Well, it's time to say no again in a bipartisan way. This President has crossed the line. Suckers and losers in our military do not belong in the same sentence, especially when you're talking about the greatest generation in Europe that gave their lives for this country. It is time. It is time not for resolutions that are political games. It is time to tell this President that he's screwed up in a big, big way. And if we don't, it will affect this country's future long after he steps out of the presidency. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise today in support of my distinguished colleague, Senator Duckworth, and her resolution to honor our veterans, military service members, and their families. Senator Duckworth knows more than anyone in this chamber about what it means to serve and to sacrifice. And I'm honored to serve alongside someone who has given so much to our country. And I might add, she got her training in Alabama, down in Dothan, down in Fort Rucker, where we have the training for all Army helicopter pilots. So thank you for that, and I hope you enjoyed your time. And we're going to get you back. Senator Duckworth is just but one representative here of her many brothers and sisters in uniform and who have worn the uniform throughout. You know, many in this body have served, and we've heard a lot today about Senator McCain. I think few stand out as military veterans more than our late colleague, John McCain, the Vietnam veteran war hero, someone who I served with but never, unfortunately, had the chance to meet. He was still a member of the Senate, but by the time I got back here in January of 2018, his illness prevented him from coming to the floor. It will always be one of my great regrets to not have at least had one day on the floor of the United States Senate with John McCain. He was a Vietnam veteran and a war hero, but he dared to speak out against a president, and who this president to this day, almost 2 years after John McCain's death, John McCain finds himself the target of the president's wrath. 2 years later, and he still has comments about a war hero. I will tell you, Mr. President, to stand on the same floor at a moment like this, the same Senate floor where a hero like Senator McCain of Arizona spoke so passionately on behalf of our military, in which Senator Duckworth speaks so passionately about our military and our veterans, it is truly an honor. Today, the loss of John McCain's voice in this chamber is magnified by the silence of too many who will not say what needs to be said. Our military families and veterans deserve our full support. They don't deserve insults. They deserve our support every day, not just when it's politically convenient. It is the duty of this body and every member of this body to defend those who have sacrificed so much to defend and protect our nation. It's the obligation of all patriots in this country to do the same. In fact, true patriots would never think to do otherwise. It would never cross our mind, the true patriot, it would never cross their mind to launch an insult into our military or our veterans, much less those who gave the ultimate sacrifice. It's what I do today and every day as a senator from Alabama, to honor our military, to honor those because I come from a state of heroes, Alabama. I worked for one of those heroes, a military hero who later became a distinguished member of this body from 1979 to 1997. Howell Heflin distinguished himself as a Marine officer in the brutal fighting of the Pacific Theater in World War II, where he was wounded twice, awarded the Purple Heart and the Silver Star for Valor, retired at the rank of Major. I'm so honored to be in his seat today, where I worked for him as a young staffer so many years ago. He too would rise in this chamber in support and defense of our military. I know. I was here. I watched him. I saw him over the years. I was with him in every campaign. He was a tireless proponent of a strong military and understood Alabama's tremendous contributions to our nation's defense, something I have tried to carry on in his stead. As Alabama Senator, Howell Heflin may have been called many things in the heat of politics, but none would have ever called him a sucker or a loser. None would have ever questioned his patriotism. Even though Alabama has a strong private sector supporting our nation's military, no one would have ever accused him of simply promoting the business of defense contractors with his strong and unwavering support of defense spending to make America safe and secure. You know, there are less than 1% of Americans who have volunteered to risk their lives, to be away from their families, their loved ones on weeks and months at a time, to uproot their families every few years and move, to put themselves in dangerous training and physical and mental strain, put themselves in harm's way when they are deployed in a combat. And yet they ask for so little in return. That, folks, is the definition of selflessness. While at one time I worked directly for a military hero in this body, today, as a United States Senator, I work for thousands of them, tens of thousands across America, but importantly, in the state of Alabama. I say Alabama is a state of heroes because it is true. Our sons and our daughters enlist and serve in our nation in numbers that far exceed our state's population. And I am so proud of that. In Alabama alone, there are 27,000 men and women who serve either on active duty or in the Guard or Reserve. Alabama is home to 377,000 veterans. That's a lot of folks in a state of my size. Not quite 10% of the population are veterans. The point here is that families in Alabama know what it means to see a loved one raise their hand and stand ready to make the ultimate sacrifice for their country. I've stood witness and nominated our best and our brightest to military academies. In the 2 years that I've been here, we've been able to get over 40 of Alabama's best and brightest high school students into our military academies. 40. And I watched with pride how they became members of the military, how their families were so proud of them, not ever dreaming that one day if they lost their life that the Commander-in-Chief of the United States might refer to them as a loser. I can assure every American that the folks that I know of, there are no suckers, there are no losers. What every volunteer from Alabama, enlisted or officer, have in common is a deep and abiding love for our country. As a member of the Armed Services Committee, I've had the honor to meet some of these folks overseas. I traveled with my friend and colleague, Senator Reid, here. I met with folks from Alabama. I felt their pride of the job that they were doing in Afghanistan and Iraq. They feel it deep down because that's the core of a patriot. That's the core of the American values. We owe each of them not just our gratitude, but our commitment to serve them as they are serving or have served us. We have a duty to uphold our promises to care for them and their families, to provide good health care, to help them get an education and transition to good jobs after service. We've got a duty to honor them with action and with humble appreciation. And we should have the decency and sense of patriotism to not denigrate their service, especially if you have avoided making such a sacrifice yourself. Over the past 2 years, I was fortunate to know a little bit better what it really means to serve and to sacrifice while I was working on the elimination of the military widow's tax. I got to know people like Kathy Milford from Mobile, Alabama, and so many others whose late spouses had served honorably. And I was shocked to learn that for decades they had been denied full survivor benefits, that their spouses had earned because the federal government just wanted to save a few extra bucks. That our country could allow such an injustice to occur for nearly 4 decades is unconscionable, but we set out to change it. Kathy used to talk about it. She came up here every year, and she would say that every time she would argue for the elimination of the tax, it was like digging her husband up from the grave. Sadie McCormick's husband passed away in a training accident in South Korea less than 3 years ago. She's got 2 kids at Auburn University, including a daughter who's a recent Miss Peanut for the Dothan area where Fort Rucker is located. Sadie's a Gold Star wife who became a strong advocate on the military widow's tax issue. She had to go back to work teaching school to pay the bills because of that widow's tax. Lois Thompson of Dothan is a widow of Army CW4 Richard Thompson, who retired after 35 years and 1 day of service. He retired in 1991 and died on March 18, 2013, suffering from ALS for more than 6 years. He served 2 tours of duty where he waded into streams contaminated with Agent Orange. Senator Tester spoke about the denial of benefits to those that have suffered because of their contamination with Agent Orange. Ms. Thompson's 85 years old, and she was the caretaker during his extended illness. She said, "You know, my husband served 2 tours in Vietnam, waiting in streams of Agent Orange. The war was so unpopular he couldn't wear his uniform home and was spit on upon arrival back in the States. Our soldiers are often not treated right, even these days. I agree with Ms. Thompson. And that's coming down from the Commander-in-Chief. So let me make this clear. The sacrifice made by these women and men and their families is incalculable. And for far too many years, we have failed to do our duty and keep the promise to those heroes. And so I am so glad that with a bipartisan effort in this body and in the House, bipartisan, bicameral, we were able to correct that in last year's defense budget. Unfortunately, Mr. President, I cannot say that I'm surprised by reports that the President called Americans who died in war losers and suckers. It seems to be just the latest in a series of comments he has made that demonstrates a lack of respect for those who serve. That respect goes far beyond just simply putting money into our defense and our military. It goes to your patriotism. It goes to your heart. It's easy to put money into something. It's easy to do those kind of things, especially when you've got an armed services like we have here in the Senate that works in such a bipartisan fashion. It's a whole different thing to really talk in the privacy of only a few people about what you really believe. I can't say I'm surprised that combat wounded veterans make him so uncomfortable that he would ban them from military events and parades. They are reminders of his own failure to serve when called upon. I'm not surprised, but I am deeply disappointed. Deeply disappointed. Our troops deserve a commander-in-chief who understands, or at the very least, appreciates their service. As of yesterday, 52,143 Americans have been wounded in Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom. 6,784 Americans have given their lives for those two missions. Many more have been deployed, often repeatedly, bringing home experiences and memories that's going to impact them for the rest of their lives. And their dedicated families have served alongside them throughout every bit, every step of the way. Few among us can truly understand this kind of sacrifice for a cause greater than ourselves. But what we should all be able to understand is that they deserve our respect, our gratitude, and our unwavering efforts to uphold our promise to them and their families. So as I conclude, I stand here today and think about those sacrifices, the pain that John McCain lived with, the pain that Tammy Duckworth lived with, the honor with which he and she and Howell Heflin served, and all of those who have served and sacrificed over the years, all those families, and all those who serve today. And it's stunning to me that the only sacrifice that we in this chamber may suffer for our vote today is to suffer the wrath of a president because we stood in support of them and not him. After all they have done, say what needs to be said. We have to support them and not fear a baseless tweet from the president. A baseless tweet is just simply not too high a price to pay for doing what is right by our military and our military families. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I rise to express my strong support for the Senate resolution sponsored by Senator Duckworth, which condemns the denigration by President Trump of our nation's armed forces and veterans. I also want to commend Senator Duckworth for her extraordinary and heroic service as an Army aviator. She inspires all of us with her courage and her sacrifice. In a September 3rd article in The Atlantic, Jeffrey Goldberg cataloged a list of disparaging comments President Trump has made about members of the United States military and wounded warriors. Such remarks are not unusual for this president, and most are public knowledge. However, we should not become numb to such behavior, so some of the comments bear repeating. The Atlantic article states that the president refused to visit the Aulnay-Marne American Cemetery in France, the final resting place of 2,289 Americans who died in battle, ensuring our freedom and the freedom of our allies against the march of totalitarianism, authoritarianism, fascism, and communism over the past century. He refused to visit because he said the cemetery was filled with suckers and losers. Several years ago, in planning a military parade to honor himself, he refused to include wounded war veterans, stating, "No one wants to see that." When he visited the grave of General John Kelly's son, who died in Afghanistan at the age of 29 and is buried in Arlington National Cemetery, he wondered to General Kelly why his son would join the Marines. What was in it for him? When impressed by a presentation by General Joe Dunford, then the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he asked his staff why such a talented person would join the military. Donald Trump is a man who cannot conceive of service to others before oneself. His view of the world is transactional. The only thing of value to him is money, not ideals or principles or the lives of our fellow Americans. He simply doesn't understand the words of one of his predecessors, President George Herbert Walker Bush, who said, "We must tell the stories of those who fought and died in freedom's cause. We must tell their stories because those who've lost loved ones need to know that a grateful nation will always remember. We must tell their stories so that our children and grandchildren will understand that our lives might have been had it not been for their sacrifice." Donald Trump does not think deeply about what it means to be in the military, to be deployed in the battle zone, wondering if every day would be your last day, to be a family member waiting anxiously at home, to be a young, healthy person suddenly disabled, or a Gold Star family who wakes every day mourning their lost son or daughter, but understanding the great cause they died for. Donald Trump only cares about the next win for himself, his fortune, or his popularity. Donald Trump deferred service in Vietnam 5 times, including one deferment for a diagnosis of bone spurs, which is remarkable given the propensity he has to play golf, given such a debilitating injury. He has said that those who served in Vietnam were suckers for not finding a way out, never able to acknowledge that his privilege of birth and race were largely responsible for being able to avoid service in that war. Furthermore, President Trump, true to his character, has doubled down and denigrated the military service of past presidents and military officers, including, as has been referred to repeatedly, Senator John McCain, my close colleague on the Armed Services Committee, my chairman. He referred to Senator McCain as a loser when he died and wondered why the nation should honor him with flags lowered to half staff. He said he prefers those who had never captured in war. He would prefer those who never served to a man like Senator McCain, who survived over 5 years in a Vietnamese prisoner of war camp, who refused to leave his comrades behind when given the chance, and who endured well-chronicled torture and humiliation that made him an inspiration to so many. In fact, one of the most moving moments in my life was to be in the Hanoi Hilton with John McCain and to have Senator McCain talk about the torture, the humiliation, the degradation that he endured each day and maintained his courage and his commitment to this nation. The president also does not understand the good order and discipline that are the hallmark of a military in a democracy, ensuring that our military men and women remain firmly tethered to our nation's moral and ethical principles in the most demanding wartime environments. That is why he saw nothing wrong with intervening in the legal process to pardon a service member
accused of war crimes. That is why he was able to stand on the steps of the White House and make comments intended to drive a wedge between the men and women in uniform, the junior officers and enlisted, and their senior leaders, impugning the motives of senior military officers who have dedicated their lives to the service of the country, who have bled in some cases for this country. Never in this nation's history has a president held the military and those who serve in such disdain and disregard. Never. His support for the military is hollow. He touts pay raises that were scheduled to happen anyway, and congressional increases in defense spending for readiness, which he then diverts to build an ill-advised and wasteful wall on the southern border. He falls short in what matters most, caring about our men and women in uniform and their well-being and lives, and thinks instead of how they might be useful to him to further his own interest and image. Donald Trump cannot relate to those who serve in the armed forces or understand what would motivate them to choose the harder road of a life of service, of discomfort, and arduous experience to defend this nation. Mr. President, while I know that every American, especially those in uniform, listens to the words of the President, it is my fervent hope that our uniformed personnel do not take the President's words on this issue to heart. As a person who has the privilege to have led paratroopers, I can tell you there is no greater honor to be among those who serve and protect our nation, who sacrifice every day so that Americans can live in freedom and peace. As President Theodore Roosevelt famously said, the credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, and spends himself in a worthy cause, who at best, if he wins, knows the thrills of high achievement, and if he fails, at least fails daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory or defeat. I guess President Trump would say, the losers. Our men and women in uniform who fight and die and are wounded for our nation and its ideals, they are in the arena, not President Trump. As all public servants are trying to make our country a better place, they, particularly those in uniform, deserve all the credit. A president who is proud that he's always stood on the sidelines and denigrates them does not deserve such credit. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Minnesota.
Mr. President, I rise today to honor our veterans and service members. I thank Senator Reid for his beautiful remarks and his service, as well as Senator Carper and as well as Senator Duckworth, who is leading our efforts today as she has led for so long. As I listen to my colleagues, I note that many of them were couching their remarks in history of people that I literally could imagine John McCain right now walking up and down that aisle, crossing the aisle, coming over, working with people, slapping people in the back, how much he loved this place and how much he loved our country. I remember the silent, courageous fortitude of Danny Inouye. And I remember so many of those that I passed paths with, like Senator Dole. And I think the reason we talk about that history is because we know that this argument and this cause is based in history. Our democracy is based in history. The idea that people serve is based in history. They don't serve for themselves. They serve, in the words of Senator McCain, for a cause larger than themselves. And that's why I picture those that serve before us, just like our soldiers do when they sign up to serve. The brave men and women who have served in our armed forces represent the best among us. Whether you served decades ago or you still wear a uniform today, we owe you a debt of gratitude for your service and sacrifice on behalf of our great nation. All service members and veterans have something in common. Wherever they are politically, they have something in common. And regardless of when and where they serve, they have something in common. A deep love of our country and a very real understanding of what it means to serve and sacrifice. And they deserve a commander-in-chief that loves our country in the same way, for the same reasons, and has that same deep understanding of why those soldiers signed up to serve. Unfortunately, as my colleagues have pointed out, the person currently entrusted to be the commander-in-chief of our brave servicemen and women has, according to many, many recent reports, including things he has actually said on TV, has made repeated comments denigrating their service, questioning their judgment, and belittling those who were prisoners of war or who made the ultimate sacrifice in service to our country. Yes, I will never forget what he said about Senator McCain when he died, which Senator McCain's friend Jack Reed just recalled. I too stood in front of that cell in Vietnam with John McCain where he had been held. And when you stand there and you think about the fact that he made the decision to allow others to be released before him, that's courage. What does it say to our service members when a commander-in-chief cancels a visit to an American cemetery in France because, according to one report, he feared his hair would be ruined by the rain? What does it say, as reported in The Atlantic, when he questions the value of paying his respects to fallen Americans by claiming service members killed in the service of this country are losers and suckers? What does it say when he expresses contempt for not just John McCain, who spent more than 5 years as a prisoner of war, but also accuses former President George H.W. Bush of being a loser for being shot down by the Japanese as a Navy pilot in World War II? And finally, what does it say to our troops when the president refuses to publicly condemn, warn, or even criticize Vladimir Putin, following news reports that Russia offered bounties for the killing of members of our armed forces and our coalition partners? Our service members are always there for us, and we must be there for them. Even when our nation is divided, we must still collectively reject any attempt to diminish their service. We learned that in a big way after Vietnam. I remember standing at one of our Serve Our Troops events in Minnesota a few years ago, and that is when our restaurants and community comes together, sometimes thousands of people, to serve the families of the troops that are serving overseas a steak dinner, all donated. At the same time, the troops are somehow getting the same dinner. It's an extraordinary event, and many of us volunteer to work on the lines. And one day when I was there was a Vietnam vet, and he was serving up mashed potatoes, and he had a Vietnam vet hat on, and I said, "Thank you for your service." And he said, when I came home, I was greeted by tomatoes. I don't want this to ever happen to another soldier again. That's why I come here every year to volunteer. And we learned back then that you can have major disagreements about war and war policy, but you do not take it out on the warriors on the front line. Sadly, right now we have a commander-in-chief who takes out everything on everyone, including personal vendettas against people like Senator McCain. Rather than being silent, as sadly too many have been in reaction to his comments, I think we must stand up. I think the way that we honor their service and sacrifice is being very clear that we condemn the remarks that the president has made. And as I noted, and I'll end with this, the last time I saw Senator McCain, I was at the ranch, and he was in his last months of life. My husband and I went there and sat with Cindy and with John. And at the very end, he was getting tired, and he wasn't talking much anymore, and he was having trouble talking anyway. And he pointed at one of his books, and I picked it up, and that's when he pointed, without saying the words, to that sentence: "There's nothing more liberating than life in life than fighting for a cause larger than yourself. That's what unites our troops when they sign up to serve. That's what should unite us in this chamber right now. I urge my colleagues to join in this effort so that our men and women in uniform across the United States and around the world know that we will not remain silent. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from New Hampshire.
Well, Mr. President, I want to start by thanking the senator from Minnesota for her remarks just now. I rise with her and to join Senator Duckworth and our colleagues in responding to the shameful comments that President Trump reportedly made about our service members. I want to begin by thanking Senator Duckworth for leading us in this effort and for her service to our country, as I want to thank all of the members of the United States Senate and all of the staff of the United States Senate who have served their country and all of their families. Mr. President, one of our nation's greatest strengths is the countless Americans who throughout our history have been willing to sacrifice everything to keep us safe and preserve our freedom. In New Hampshire, we're proud to be home to a high percentage of service members, veterans, and their families. And in my experience, people in my state and all across the country revere the bravery and sacrifices of those who serve and those who have served. We may disagree about policy matters, including those that impact when and where service members are deployed. But the respect that we have for service members, veterans, and their families must be undisputed. Mr. President, it's the President's duty to honor the sacrifices of our troops, to care for them, to support them, and their fallen comrades. And the role of the President of the United States of America is not just limited to being the commander-in-chief. Presidents should also lead by example and represent the values of the American people. Unfortunately, President Trump has yet again expressed his disdain and lack of understanding of why people sacrifice for our freedom and democracy. This is a failure of leadership, and it is a failure of basic citizenship that is out of step with most Americans. Mr. President, last year I joined a bipartisan group of senators to travel to burial grounds in both France and Belgium as we paid our respects to our World War II fallen service members. It was an honor of a lifetime. It was also deeply personal, as my dad served in the Battle of the Bulge. Standing on those hallowed grounds was a powerful reminder of the loss of war, of those heroes who gave everything to fight against fascism and to protect freedom. We owe these heroes our profound gratitude and our deepest respect. Yet when speaking of service members who were killed or captured, the President referred to these heroes as suckers and losers. For such words to come from the President of the United States is an affront to all that we stand for, and it is beneath the office that he holds. But unfortunately, these comments were not surprising given the President's long line of denigrating comments against those who have served, including the late Senator John McCain, Gold Star families, and other American heroes. Mr. President, the resolution that we are introducing today recognizes the unmeasurable debt that we owe to those who have valiantly served our country, as well as their families. And this resolution condemns the repeated disrespect that this President has bestowed upon them. My colleagues on both sides of the aisle have seen the hurtful comments President Trump has made about members of our military. Every single one of us should condemn them. And Mr. President, I will close with this. My father didn't talk about his service in World War II very often, but he did talk about his unit, a group of men who came from as diverse backgrounds as our country is large. They had their disagreements. They didn't agree on politics, but they came together every day to win that war. Now, of course, they knew that their lives depended on their unity, their cohesion. But they knew something else, too. And this is what my dad always reminded us of. Sometimes at the breakfast table, he would look up at us and say, "What are you doing for freedom today?" And it was a question he had the right to ask, because he was remembering his unit of men from all over the country, from all different life experiences, who knew that freedom, their country, our country, the United States of America, is worth fighting for. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.